Now onto our x-axis. First thing we do is get our table, clean it all up. We run a flat wheel or a grinding disc over these surfaces in here to get rid of all the casting flash. The clearance between the top of the ball screw nut and this surface here is very close. So if you've got any flash on here, it'll rub on your ball screw nut. It doesn't need to take the excess amount, but just get rid of so there's no high spots, especially on these sides here. Quite often you have big lumps of casting. Remove those. The next thing we need to do is machine some of our ball nut as we've done here. We also machine a little bit off this surface here to give us a little bit extra clearance to do it up. I don't recommend taking the ball nut off to do this job. What we do is get some good tape. Tape your ball nut up and then tape down your ball screw shaft. That seals it up. The ball screws themselves have a seal on the end that stops ingress of dirt. If you take them off, you may lose all your ball nuts, which are very hard to repack. And also any dirt will get in there in the grinding process. So if you tape these up nicely, you won't have any troubles. Then it's just a matter of running a cut-off disc to cut this off flush with this top surface, and then just slightly round it over. And we normally take about 2 mm off the bottom here, just to give us clearance for the adjuster screws. We've modified the saddle. We've cut a piece out here for the ball screw relief to fit into, and also a piece over here for the oiling adapter to fit into. These are a non-critical part that can be done with a grinder, and same with this, or we'd put on the mill and mill it out for a small charge if you send us the saddle. The adapter's on here, so we sit that in. The other thing we also do is grind these to a point. That way they bite into the aluminium adapter better, and they also get a little bit of clearance here for the base of here, because this sits like this and locks it in. And if you haven't got that ground, you can't get it quite low enough. So these fit back in here. and we just wind them in most of the way. And we just take them in and just slightly nip them. And that just holds the ball screw in loosely. They're not nipped very tight at all, it just stops the ball screw moving while we're putting the carriage on. Now to put our carriage on the table, which all the surfaces. We'll make sure we've cleaned everything and oiled everything nicely. Slide the table on. Make sure it's all running freely. And put our gibs in. Initially we leave our gibs fairly loose. And then we'll do a proper adjustment of those later on. Now we're ready to put our motor mount on. This bolt's in the original position. Now we just put this on loosely so it's got room to move around and align itself. Next we back off the ball screw lock under here so the ball screw can move around freely. Right, with angular contact thrust, we find sometimes the casting and the top here touches, so we've got to grind a little relief, which we found on pre-assembly with this one. Once that's done, we put this in, line the thrust up, slide it on. Lightly lock it down. After everything's all finished with this, we'll come back and Loctite all these bolts. Because we're going to check it a couple more times, we'll leave them dry at the moment. It's not uncommon to have the table on off 2 or 3 times, just making sure your clearances are okay, nothing's touching, nothing's binding. And then we put our lock nut on. Stop recording. Then at the other ends, with supported ends, put our support bearing in. This one also goes in the original mount positions. It is slotted, so there's some adjustment to line the ball screw up properly. And we'll come back later and knock this bearing in further and put the retaining clip on. Now initially I do this up to seat it, then back it off. You want it to be able to move up and down so I can centre the ball screw when we run it through its travels in a second. Right, now to centre our ball screw in our pocket, we run it from end to end. Then we take it back to close to this end. We'll nip down our ball screw. Same procedure again, run it from end to end, make sure it's all still running freely. There's no binding points. Then we come back up to our other end. We nip this end up. Run it through its travels again. Make sure everything's good. Everything feels nice. We then get a coupler. And we use a coupler so we can run it by hand just to make sure everything feels good. There's no tight spots. And then we can also use the same thing to adjust the gibs. So we just run it through its full range of motion, make sure everything's good, make sure everything's free, can't feel any tight spots anywhere. If that's all good, then we do the same thing, we adjust the gibs up, and away we go. If you want this motor, if we want the motor at the other end, we've got to flip the ball screw nut, which we showed you how to do in the Y-axis video. So this can go on either end, depending on which way suits your layout better. Right, now onto our Z-axis. We've got a Z-axis ball screw. It's fitted with an oiler. We get our ball screw adapter, put that in through the slot, then place the ball screw through that. Get our 4 bolts, M16 by 6. And put those in with a bit of Loctite on them. And do them up tight. Now we get our M8 bolts for our Z slide. And we just fit them loosely to start with. Remember, on the MH28V, there's a spring that supports the Z. That fits in through these 2 bolts. Best to fit that first. Because we're doing it not on the column, I'll leave that till we do it later. Slide this up. Then we get our motor mount and loosely fit that. Now, none of this is done up tight until we run it through its range of motion. Then we get our thrust bearing. And fit that. These have been Loctited already. Our lock nut for the ball screw. And as we've done previously, we'll put a coupler on there temporarily so we can do it up. Right, once that's tight, take that off. We'll get our drill. We're going to run it through its range of motions. Bring it towards the top. Do up our ball screw. Do up our plate. And run it back through its range again to make sure everything's nice. Then to finish off, we put a coupler on, ready for our motor, and just adjust our gibs, make sure everything's running freely all the way through the range, and fully tighten everything.